Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
For Black Elk and the Lakota people, the Tipi was a sacred dwelling place that conveyed deep truth. We don't often make a connection to the Bible, where for much of the Old Testament, God lived in a tent, and the New Testament literally says Jesus pitched his tent among us. Tent, Tipi, Tabernacle. What do these places say about where God dwells? We're about to find out. Hello, Medakiepi. Welcome to Hochoka, here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus. I'm Scott Wooster, your Hochoka host. We're glad you've joined our circle with Dr. Damian Costello, who is with us today for another fresh perspective on Christianity through an indigenous lens. Damian, welcome back.
Thanks, Scott. Good to be here.
So with the header, I think you feel the same way that I do, or the intro. We're talking about sacred places, and I always feel like this right here is one of those places where we have these conversations with whoever the guest happens to be, that something kind of takes over a place like this when we're talking about sacred things. This becomes a sacred place. And we just smudged and said a prayer before we went into this conversation. So I think it's kind of neat that I think you feel the same way about that. So let's kick off a spiritual conversation in a spiritual place.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you and I would both agree that God or the Great Spirit is everywhere, all around us, all the time. Of course, special places are built for God to worship and to and for prayer and such. So when we think about where God lives, it's pretty easy to say churches would fill that role, and we're in the back of a church right now. Of course, we're in this back behind the sacristy or in a room in the back here. We don't always think about teepees, and that's what we're coming to you for today. What's your take on that?
Well, absolutely, Scott. Of course, the Creator's everywhere. You can never contain the Creator, but we need, as human beings, special places where we can meet Creator in special ways. And so, of course, you mentioned the church, but a teepee is also one of those places. And most importantly, in Lakota tradition, that's where people lived, right? And we were talking before this episode that there is something special about going into a teepee. There's a real sacred character to it, that circular nature that's so different than our regular experience.
Right. And you're literally surrounded, if you go back to the indigenous people, everything that comes for the teepee or the sweat lodge or whatever they had comes from nature, and it comes from their spirituality. We've talked before about that connection to nature being so important and everything working together.
And in nature, Black Elk says this, that everything that is done in nature is in a circle, right? The sky is a circle, the horizon is a circle, the seasons are a circle. And so it's appropriate that you would live in a circle. And Black Elk also taught that nature taught the Lakota people how to make a teepee, that it was the cottonwood tree, which is at the center of the Sundance ceremony, as you know, showed the people how to make a teepee through the shape of its leaves.
So, yeah, if you're living in a teepee, you've got the cottonwood trees, which are there for the support, right? And you've got probably buffalo hides surrounding you. So it's all stuff that you've harvested. It's all stuff that you've cut down, that you've killed and used to be a part of this. There's such a spiritual dimension to all of that. Can you talk about that spiritual dimension?
And we would probably say that it was everything that had been offered to you by creation, right? The buffalo had offered themselves to the people that they may live. The same with the trees and anything else that goes into it. And putting up the teepee is a sacred event, right? The context I know best for this is a Navajo context. I was once helping set up a teepee for a ceremony, and it'd been my first time. And I showed up, and I thought, okay, we're going to move all the poles around, which we did. But after they had put the 4 sort of key poles in, the person setting it up or in charge stopped, and he leaned against one of the poles and said a long prayer in Navajo, and then went on to the next one. And so what he was doing was saying the prayers for the 4 sacred mountains, for the foundation of the teepee.
Oh.
So there's always like a spiritual dimension in when you put up a teepee.
Yeah, absolutely. And a teepee can be a lot harder and less intuitive than you might think to put up.
I mean, Scott, you know this. You think that's got to be pretty easy, right? It's just a bunch of sticks leaning together. No, it's a complicated, sophisticated process.
It really is.
And you wonder, how did people figure this out?
Exactly.
But, like with most things in the indigenous world, they're so much more complicated than you think of from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two pieces to that. One, it's the geometry or whatever it might be of that is tricky to piece together. But there's always that thing behind it of where each pole is placed means something special, and you referred to the 4 mountains, and I'm assuming in the Lakota tradition here, directions would play a part in that.
And let me add that, like a lot of sacred dwellings across the globe, the teepee represents the universe as a whole. It's a universe in the microcosm. And when Black Elk was brought up into the sky world in his great vision, he was brought to the cloud teepee of the 6 grandfathers. The 6 grandfathers representing all the powers of the universe: east, south, west, north, Mother Earth, and Father Sky. And so that there's always a sense that the sacred dwelling that we build on earth is just a copy, an imitation of like the more dramatic and holy version that's in the world behind this.
Mm-hmm. And star knowledge, all that kind of stuff falls in there. I mean, that's deep dive stuff that we're not going to deal with today.
On it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's so complex and it's so infused with nature, and it's so spirituality is so embedded in it that if you were living that way, back in times where that's how they lived, you would feel that every single day in everything you did. At least I would hope so. In my romantic notion of it, that's the way it looks.
There's a sense that it's almost like living in a church.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so our audience might know some of that already. Some of that, some may not. But is teepee part of the Catholic tradition? Is teepee part of the Christian tradition?
I didn't make the connection until relatively recently, like within the last few years, but that in the Old Testament, as the Israelites were on their Exodus journey out of slavery for 40 years, they lived in tents. They were nomadic people. And God, when he revealed himself to Moses on Mount Sinai and gave the 10 Commandments, he put that in the Ark of the Covenant, and that was housed in a tent. That was the Holy of Holies. And so when the people picked up, like the Lakota people, to follow the trail, they picked up their tent, they packed it up, carried the Ark of the Covenant, and then pitched it again for God to live in it.
Yeah. Yep. And so it's maybe not too much of a stretch to think of the church as a form of tent.
Absolutely. And I should say that the tabernacle today within a church, a Catholic church where the Eucharist is housed, is the same word that was used to house the Ark of the Covenant. So that lives on very specifically for the Eucharist. But the church as a whole, especially in a Lakota context, is like a tent.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the Lakota language, when they translated the Bible and they talked about churches, they would call churches Tipi Wakan.
Okay.
A holy teepee.
Yep.
So we have all these letters from Europe where Lakota people are visiting churches and they're talking about these huge teepee wakans at the center of these massive cities.
Right. And with almost a steeple-like structure, right? It would look in a lot of ways. I assume the one, if we were to walk outside, the church we're sitting in comes to a point, right? And so maybe that could add to that too as well.
Our Lady of the Sioux is standing under a teepee, yes.
Yeah. Interesting, yeah. So here we are. So this kind of changes the way we think about churches and God and the structure of it.
Yes, this changes how we look at churches. I think here at St. Joseph's Indian School, done amazing work inculturating the Catholic faith within the Lakota context, right? You go see the stained glass windows, there's the buffalo skull next to the altar, Our Lady of the Sioux on the outside. But there's always this sense like, we have to ask permission for this, right? Because of course, churches are that's where God belongs. And I'm not here to criticize that.
Yep.
But if we look at the history, a teepee actually is more appropriate for its original context, for the Old Testament context. So in the beginning of the Gospel of John, where we usually translate as the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the more literal and better translation is the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, or pitched his tent among us. So tent in the New Testament, and Paul will use this, is an image of the body, right? So the body is ephemeral, right? It lasts for 60, 70, 80 years, maybe at best. But like a tent, it more easily falls apart or is taken down than a stone building.
Yeah.
And so that's how the biblical writers understood how you would talk about the body.
Yeah. I like that too. I like that that connection of that. So we're temples, as we're living temples, basically.
Living
part
teepees.
of it. Yeah, living teepees even. Yep. One thing that's kind of interesting is I've been in, without saying too much or talking about ceremony too much, but I've been in traditional ceremonies that have been in houses, just regular houses that folks live in on the reservation, in square rooms with the windows covered up and had ceremony in there. And I've also had been in ceremony in a teepee where you block all the light and you have that ceremony in there. And that circular piece of that is such a big deal. Because it just feels, there's something about it, I'm trying to talk about it, but I can't really explain it. It just feels right. And there's a piece of the way they live too in a circle with their individual teepees that maybe you could talk about that too.
The very name of this podcast, Hochoka, is the sacred circle of teepees that was set up. So the teepees, the sacred dwelling, was put in a circle as the ideal form, both to protect the people, but also because that's the way the Creator made the world. And so I agree, ceremonies in teepees, there's something so much more powerful about them. And so I think maybe there's a time we should have a mass within the teepee here at St. Joseph's Indian School.
Yeah, wouldn't that be neat? Yeah, that would be nice to have.
Yeah.
And as you say that too, I'm thinking about Sundance and the circle of folks that are participating, whether you're a supporter or a dancer or a cook or whatever that might be. The camp is set up in a circle. Of course, the arbor is set up in a circle, but there's always a gathering place in the center, right? And that's the Hochoka, and we talk about that with the name of this. We're talking in the center of camp about issues that are important to the way we live in this way and the way the kids live in this way. And so obviously you want that to be a spiritual place for what we can offer for our children. So yeah, it's good to hear about these things and good to have this conversation. And you and I are going to go into another sacred place tonight. We're going to go into the Sweat Lodge, and we're going to be able to have that, again, another sacred place, a spiritual place built from Mother Earth, and we'll be able to enjoy prayer in that setting very soon.
I look forward to that, and thank you, Scott, for including me in your work here at Hochoka and St. Joseph's Indian School to strengthen that circle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Damien, and thank you to our audience here at Hochoka at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus, where we talk about issues that are central to Native American education today. You can find us anywhere you find your podcasts online. Until next time, stay centered.